And then what's the first thing you remember? What are your first conscious memories?
The Mohill was working on me. It was the 8th day.
Oh, you liar!
My father. But this part is true. My father was horrified because he's a free thinker. He said the man had dirty fingernails, and then he held my organ in his hand and took some cheap whiskey, put it in his mouth, and sprayed it to sterilize the wound. Ever since then, I've had an aversion to cheap whiskey. The Crane was more cosmopolitan because it even had 10% black people. And a lot of Italians. The Italians were called upon to administer discipline. They figured mafia people could do that better. So the toughest Italian kids were co-opted. They were put on the flying squad, which was a super agency to maintain order, and they beat the hell out of the kids that discipline them. And actually, I got to be editor of the newspaper there, which was a daily. Can you imagine that in high school? Because we had a print shop. And I didn't last long as editor, because my first campaign was to demolish the flying squads. I lasted 2 issues. Mr. Gilson, Henry F. Gilson, was the faculty advisor, was very angry at me and threw me off the paper.
Well, so at this point, you're 20 years old, and tell me about the women in your life.
Well, there weren't many. I courted my wife to be for 7 years, or 4.5 from the time I met her when I was 17.
Where did you meet?
On the street. And lived there with my folks until I in turn entered the American Army, our side.
Did you volunteer, or were you drafted?
No, I was drafted. And in fact, I was immune from the draft. Every time I was examined, they made me 4F, which means not acceptable. They found a little node in the right hilum area of my lung, which everybody had been inoculated with tuberculosis. This was they should have taken me, but and then later my vision, I couldn't see the big E on the chart. So, but then after that, they were taking everybody. When I got in fact, I almost became an aerial gunner. I could see it because the B-24s, when I was in the B-24 field, the wind would rush through that open the fuselage, and would tear off my glasses. And then my wife became pregnant. That was our first child, Amy.
And this would have been 1945 at this point.
Yeah, she was born in 45. By then I was just out of the Army. So I got on VJ Day, the day the Japanese surrendered at Tokyo Bay. And by Tuesday, that was a Sunday, and Tuesday I was at work. Monday I went over to Marshall Fields and got a white shirt because they were being rationed, and they wrote it on my discharge paper. I can show it to you. White shirt issued to Mr. Jack Stark. They were rationing them. And then
you're getting that for work purposes?
Yeah, work purposes. Wore the same shirt all week. Well, I kept washing it every night. And churning out the words. It was exciting when we had a story closing a deadline. You had to write it a paragraph at a time. You know, so I'd feel the words being pulled out of my brain, down on my fingers. The raped and battered body of 16-year-old Mary Ellen Jones was found late today in a vacant lot at 16th and Avers. Boy, copy! Now you can't say boy or copy. The nice thing about the tube service was I was all alone on Sundays when they left me in charge during the day. It was my first spell as an editor. And I'd run out of cigarettes. I was then smoking Marlboro cigarettes, which were only 10 cents a pack. Eat your hearts out, 10 cents a pack. Marlboro cigarettes, worth crowing about. That was the, so I pick up the direct line telephone reserved for bulletins like murders and fires, and I'd tell the desk man at the City News Bureau I was out of cigarettes, so he'd send me a pack. I sent him a dime bag. But I'd have to ride the train, and then I'd come home at night, and it was a 1.5-mile walk from the station,
Wow.
which was the last train. And it was a 2-lane highway then, Route 30, the Lincoln Highway, which is a big highway now. It was a little teeny. And I carried a flashlight to ward off automobiles and raccoons, and foxes, and other dangerous animals.
Did you like working at Look magazine? Did you
It had its ups and downs, but my gosh, it was educational. I got such a big education. There was like doing hundreds of term papers, you know, every in the course of 20 years, doing these stories, because you had time to do them, a month or two. I did stories on politicians, actors.
Did you come up with your own ideas for stories? Were they
Oh
given
yes,
to you?
that's what they counted on, that you give them a feeling of the region. And I had interest. I did all stories on trouble, murders, medical malfeasance. We were doing a story on how smart the Kennedys were. They loved publicity. So when it appeared that they had beaten down Khrushchev, we were given access to the Pentagon and some secret stuff. And while I was there, everything fell apart.
Oh,
and the blockade began. It looked like a hydrogen bomb would be dropped. They shot down our spy plane over Cuba. And it was an awful time. I remember going into the Pentagon, and I would go to the press room, and I misdialed. And I said, "Is this Joe?" And he said, "Who is this?" I said, Jack Starr in the press room. He laughed. He said, "This is Colonel Ryder." And I said, "Where are you, Colonel?" I said, "Ha ha." It was 300 feet below the Pentagon, in a sealed armored room in a command center. But the mood was bleak, and I was glad that Sunday morning things got better. But I must say, as was pointed out to me, I really prefer women to men.
Why is that?
Because of my lovely daughters, and to them I owe everything, and to my wife. Women are smarter and pleasanter, and oh well. I was sent to California after Reagan had been governor for a year to evaluate him as a candidate for president. And he had a so-called kitchen cabinet. Some of these included very, very conservative Republicans, arch-conservative. They'd be very happy. I went to LA, flew to LA to interview these people. I got back to Sacramento real late, and I was a message from my editor to call him no matter what the hour. I assumed someone had died. So I called him, and he said, "What the hell happened with you and the governor?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, this guy, Taft or whoever it was, had called our owner, a fellow Republican, and a very big liberal Republican.
This is Gardner Coles.
Gardner Coles. Said, "Why do you got that commie down there, you know, taking pot shots at the governor?" I said, "You know, Bill," his name was Bill Arthur, we were friends. I said, "That's a lot of shit you're calling me while I'm on a story. It's difficult. I have to figure out what I'm doing here without putting pressures on me." He agreed, you know, I was let alone. I did a fair story. Wasn't completely flattering, because I told the truth. I stand by what I wrote.